just a sign of the times. I was listening to NPR literally this morning, and they were talking about how media and news companies are in a really big pickle. They're in a conundrum right now because, assuming that Trump steps down, again, that is assuming, um, they were like, as you know, for the last 4 years, Trump has been the best thing that has happened to media probably in the last decade and a half. And so they're like, it's been an absolute boom town for them to cover Trump and his antics. And they're like, this presents a bigger problem, right? Where news companies want to be more objective and they want to present the facts and not be sensationalists. And this is actually why they started subscriptions even back in like the 60s and 70s, because there was a huge problem in the US with yellow journalism, right? Of just like these absolutely outlandish, sensationalist headlines that get people to, at the time, spend their quarter or dollar, whatever, on the newspaper. Highly problematic when there's very little substance. And in certain ways, this NPR program is talking about how they didn't use this exact term, but they're like, we've kind of gone back to yellow journalism in certain ways and sensationalism. And they were saying that, like, perhaps not the best metric is not the number of clicks or the number of subscriptions that a newspaper gets in a given day, a given month, etc. And they were like, what news has done is that it's conflated the number of eyeballs on something with the value, the communal, educational, and emotional value that it's giving to those human beings. And, they're basically like, those are not the same thing. And the news media is once again, they're still in this period of reckoning where they're trying to ask, like, how do we do our jobs in a way that's healthy and not give people the junk food, basically, and stay alive and like put food on the table, because like news media is not doing well as an industry. And like Trump is just a huge aberration in many ways. And the coronavirus also an aberration. And even in certain ways, people are tired of coronavirus. Um, and so if Trump leaves, he'll probably still have his antics that they can report on, even if he's not president. But that's probably a large chunk of their bread. So it's like the question is, how do you recover from that? And I think that like, so there's this Yale historian who I really like, and basically his name's Timothy Snyder. And basically he talks about how he's like a foremost expert on like authoritarianism and like schisms caused by like new media, essentially. And he talks about how like when the printing press was first invented and books were disseminated into society in Europe in the 1500s, everybody thinks now that like people are like, oh my God, these books. And then like, ideas revolutionized, the Enlightenment came, et cetera, et cetera. But he was like, that's not how it worked at all. He was like, the Enlightenment was in the 1700s. He was like, between the mid 1500s and the early 1700s was essentially a bloodbath. And he was like, 1/3 of all Europeans died in that 150-year period. And he was like, that is because everyone started questioning the value of the religious institutions and even their own correctness in terms of how they describe the world. People were discovering science, and they were like, the way people made sense of ideas was drastically altered permanently. And that caused like a huge, uproar, uprising, and an ideological battle in many ways. And he was like, he's like, keep in mind, the internet has only been around in its kind of mature form for maybe 20 years, not that long. And so he was like, people think that the internet is like, just an upgraded version of books and TV. And he's like, no, it's its own completely new medium. And every time there's a new medium, we always see a schism of some kind, oftentimes with violence, etc. And so I think that like when the internet became truly ubiquitous in the 2000s, everyone kind of had this assumption that like the people who understood the internet the best, the Bill Gateses and the Zuckerbergs a little bit later on, and the tech nerds, that like everything they said about the internet was gospel, right? That like, oh, it's this like quirky place to democratize ideas. It's this thing where like, if you keep having growth and bigger communities, that just means people are more connected and so on and so forth. And I think that like people are coming to understand that like perhaps that's not the case, and that bigger numbers does not actually always equate to bigger impact, and sometimes doesn't equate at all. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes is a detriment to bigger impact. And so I think news is coming to that reckoning that a lot of different industries and areas are coming to, just about the sign of the times in general, where I feel like whether it's capitalism itself, technology, social media, people's own individual communities, where we've been inculcated in this idea that more is better, bigger numbers are better. That means you're having more impact. That means you're a more important person. That means you're a better human being and you get a gold star. But it's like perhaps that's not the case. I think we're kind of seeing a rebound away from that, where it's like the biggest industry in news media right now, the biggest booming sector, is local journalism. People literally starting their own kind of like local news outlets and getting tons of money to do that because people want to know what's going on in their community. And that's why people feel connected, right? And like there's a movement around like slow whatever, slow food, slow content, simple living, where it's like we've just been in this tizzy of speed and break this and move fast, and you're an idiot if you can't, if you haven't made 17 billion mistakes in one day. And it's like that is a way of doing things, but I think that like we as a society are coming to understand that perhaps that is not the way of doing things. And I think that like this question is pervading every area. And I think that like my reflection on creativity in the previous message is just a microcosm of everything that's going on, in terms of like it being a sign of the times of like what does impact, what does connection, what does betterment for the world actually mean, and does it actually mean higher numbers? And in certain ways I would argue that the answer is no.